much worse than the pandemic that we were going through. It was the plague, and over and they were trying to develop a medicine against it. And so in the novel, the alchemist is using this red sulfur, which is the core of all creativity, the foundation of how this world was made. They're trying to use this red sulfur because this alchemist is the last alchemist who's still in possession of it. It was created by one of his ancestors because at that time they already couldn't make it anymore. And he's trying to transform that into a medicine that can heal people from the plague. So that is a very strong thrust in alchemy to create medicine.
And what about metals? Have they actually found any evidence of transmuting metal into gold?
Well, that's why I took this example. Today, I don't think that there would be anybody in science who would say that you could make gold in the way that they do in alchemy. We can make gold. It is a matter of taking away some of the core of the nucleus, some electrons, but that's not the way they were doing it. So the scientists would say it's impossible. And that's why I was so interested in this report from 1666, where very reliable people said that it had actually happened in front of them. And they couldn't understand how it had happened, but they had to admit that something had happened. And so I took that as if this really happened. What else would be true? What else would be true? Let's take alchemy as that they're talking about what they really mean and that it's true in the physical world. That's how I started the book.
The year you chose, I was going to look this up real quick when you said, or the year that they chose, or the year that it's presented as 1666
is the year of the beast.
Well, it's also, though, something much more fascinating. If you look at numerology, the numerology of the sun, which is gold, is 666.
Yes, so also the number. Yeah, it's also the number of the devil, right?
Well, that's in Revelation that was put together in part by the Council of Nicaea, and the Vatican.
But in 1666, they called that the year of the beast. It was called the year of the beast.
Like in old days, they called it the year of the beast.
Yeah, they called it the year of the beast, 1666, because that was the year that the devil was supposed to come to Earth. And in my series, this actually happens. And so it's a struggle between the alchemist family and the devil who has come to Earth. So it's partly a story. It's all a love story, but next to being a romantic love story, it's also the battle between the devilish forces and the forces that try to make something creative and to make a medicine.
Okay. That's very interesting. And are you familiar with the planetary boxes, like the numerological values that they put to Saturn and Jupiter and Pluto and Earth and all the other?
No, I don't. I know about numerology, but I don't know about that kind of numerology that you're talking about.
Yeah. What it is it's basically like hermetics also. And I'll bet you once you see, you know what I'm talking about, where they'll take it's called a magic square. That's it. Planet's magic square. So if you take the sun, I think it's so significant you said 666 on that, and then the year of transmuting something into gold. I'm wondering if that's also an alchemical, like if it's metaphoric for something. So let me just show this to you real quick, because I think this is wonderful. I'm so glad you brought that up. Real simple search here. What you do is you type in magic squares, and in hermetics, especially if you look at the hermetics from like the Renaissance time, the sun, let me find this here. Here we go. The sun itself, Sol, this is the box, and it's 111 at the end of each number. So, and it's 6 down. So 111 times 6, you get 666 with the sun. Fascinating. So you could have this dual meaning. You know, you could have the dark and the light, even connected with the mark of the beast, but then maybe there's deeper meaning to it.
Yes, well, I think that it's very striking. Numerology is extremely important also in alchemy. The number 6 would usually be related to sex and to the animal, and so alchemy makes use of numerology, and I find this very interesting. What you're just showing of the boxes, I had known about that.
Hey man, it's just another layer. You know, this is wonderful to have this conversation, and I was hoping you could explain colors in alchemy, because I think that's fascinating.
Alchemy is talking about how the process is going through a series of colors. And the way that they're describing it, of course, you have to see that an alchemical oven can have up to 64 different compartments in it. So there are many different processes going on at the same time. So when I would talk about a linear idea about moving from one color to another color, that movement, all these happened at the same time, but I can only tell it to you as a sequential movement, as a narrative. In the same way that in dreaming, there are many things going on at the same time, but we can only tell it to ourselves as a narrative. So the narrative of the colors in alchemy is really interesting. They say it begins in green, and green is like the greening of nature. It is the green of springtime. And in alchemy, it is actually the copper oxide. It is the green that grows on copper. And you have to understand in alchemy that there are the planets, the known planets, the sun. This was all seen as planet means wanderer. So it is those parts that wander through the sky. And so that was seen the sun, and the sun was related to gold because all the planets had implanted their seed in the earth, and those were the metals. So the sun had implanted gold, the moon had implanted silver, Venus had implanted copper, Jupiter has implanted tin, Mars has implanted iron, and Mercury implanted mercury, and Saturn implanted lead. And so these were all different seeds of the planets, and the planets were in between us in our mortal world and the immortality of the stars. In between that, there was an in-between world that was the world of the planets. That took part both of our lives and of the life of eternity. But anyway, I get distracted. About the color. So it begins in green, and so you have copper oxide that is green. And when you start to work on copper oxide, it turns black. And so you move from green to black, and the word black is called the nigredo, the blackening, and it's the black of night. And during the nigredo, everything falls apart, and you begin to sense that everything becomes senseless, and everything becomes meaningless, and you get into a state of rot, in a state of disintegration. That's all part of the black. And when you get to the bottom of the black, you get into the mood of, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. So that is the depth, the nadir of the black. And as it begins to move out of that into what is called the blues, the dark blues, like I lost my house, I lost my car, I lost my marriage, I lost everything. That kind of sense. In country songs or in the blues in Native American community, The blues are where you begin to be sad about what you've lost. And then as you get into that, you get into a phase of many colors. It's called the peacock's tail. And as you get into the state of the peacock's tail, there are all these kind of new shimmerings, things coming to life, new things beginning to grow, new things, new possibilities coming up. And that moves into what is called the light blue. The light blue is the heaven. And in the heaven, the creative spark that is in everything starts to emerge. And then that light blue goes to silver, to white. And as it moves to silver, we move from this side of the mirror to the other side of the mirror. So now we are in the world of images. And as it moves into the silver of the mirror and the silver of the reflection of the images, that is then put into the earth, into the ground, and then a fermentation process starts in the body. That is the yellow. And the yellow fermentation that goes through the body creates new things that begin to emerge from the body, new things that are possibilities that move into the world. And as they move into the world and start to change the world and affect the world, then it turns red, and red is related to gold. So that is the movement from green to gold in alchemy.
I was way off in what I was thinking. I was thinking about the chakras and red to ultraviolet. But this is a whole new ball game with alchemy. So fascinating. I've studied a little bit of alchemy, but not enough to even really have a powerful conversation unless I have a chance to talk to somebody like you that knows so much. And now I'm like doing more of the listening, and just this is so fascinating. And you can kind of connect it with everyday life.
Absolutely, because see, if you have spent your life in innocence, right, and everything that you're doing is fine and everybody else is to blame. If you know people like that, so then they're stuck in green, and you never mature. In order to mature, you have to go through falling apart. You cannot. The alchemists say nothing can come into being that hasn't first gone through destruction. So that if you are in a period of falling apart, that doesn't mean that something is wrong. It just means that you're moving from an old self into a new self, and that always goes through this black. So it's a different way of looking than if you think that when you're falling apart and when everything is a state of confusion and you don't know where you are anymore, that there's something wrong. No, there may not be anything wrong. It may be a shift of phase. Now that I find very interesting, and it's been very useful in my work as a psychotherapist.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about Asclepius and
Asclepius, yeah.
Yeah. Could you tell us more about the connections with like healing sanctuaries, Western medicine?
Yes. 10 years ago, we founded the Santa Barbara Healing Sanctuary, where we started to use methods that had been used starting 2,800 years ago in Greece. They were following a legendary physician called Asclepius, and there were temples to Asclepius, and one of the people who had a temple like that was Hippocrates. Hippocrates, we still know from medicine, because most medical doctors swear a Hippocratic oath about do no harm that comes from Hippocrates. So Hippocrates was the first major Western physician. Now, if you look at his sanctuary in Kos, there was a major place in the sanctuary that was for dreamers. And so when you would go to the sanctuary, you would go and you would be given the opportunity to sleep in what is called the abaton. And the abaton that comes from the word abatijn, where you you have not treaded before, the place where you haven't gone before. And there you go and you sleep on benches. The benches were called clinae, from which we have the word clinic. So it was the first clinic. And there people would dream, and then the god would come in their dreams and would heal them in their dreams. And there are I think, something like 70 reports from 2,500 years ago of healing cases that took place at those sanctuaries. And so we started a sanctuary where we are also using dreaming for healing of physical illness, like MS and Parkinson's and cancer. And so we started to use it for that, because that's what it was used for in the beginning. It was not used for emotional healing, it was used for physical healing.
Now that takes it to a whole new level, huh? You don't learn that in most schools.
Right. And especially they don't learn it at medical school. I mean, I teach at a medical school, and most people don't know this. Most of the young doctors don't know this.
Being a doctor is, you got to have a certain mindset, clearly, to be a doctor. I've a family member, he just retired at 70 as emergency. He worked in the ER for years, and super hard worker. But
yeah,
it's been kind of, in my opinion here, from what I've noticed, and clearly I'm not a doctor. I'm just a crazy guy in the garage here that loves to do podcasts and learn and share. But it seems like it's
an interesting fellow, though.
Yeah, thank you. And it seems like it's separated from, kind of like astrology and astronomy. It used to be one science hundreds of years ago, but now it's totally separated. And I'm not talking about the stuff you get out of the newspaper where you're reading your horoscope.
No. I know.
Yeah. So this is wonderful conversation, and what a glimpse of hope and opportunity for people when you talk about this.
I find that the younger physicians that are there are getting to be very interested in this. They're very interested in imagination. They're very interested in creativity and how it affects health. Of course, I'm teaching a psychiatrist and neurologist, but I'm sure that it's happening in other faculties as well.
Sure. And the creative imagination, you talk about several different types of imagination: creative imagination, voluntary imagination, and exploratory or embodied imagination.
Embodied imagination. But, basically I'm talking about two different kinds of imagination, and then I give one of them many terms because there, over the years, many terms have been used for it. So there's the voluntary imagination. The voluntary imagination is that you can access at will. So you can imagine a tree, and you can imagine a car, and you can imagine, you can remember and imagining where you were last week. The involuntary imagination, and that is what I call also creative imagination or the embodied imagination. The involuntary imagination comes to you. So you suddenly find yourself in it. And the prime example of involuntary imagination or embodied imagination is a dream. A dream is not something you make up. A dream is a place where you find yourself. So it surrounds you entirely. You're somewhere, you're in something. And that is what I call the involuntary imagination or the creative imagination or the embodied imagination.
Nice. And imagination is a very powerful tool with alchemy, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yes, because they distinguish between two forms. One they call the true imagination, and the true imagination is a way of how you can connect to a real world by way of imagination. So that imagination is a tool to connect to a real world that is the reality of imagination, and in the reality of imagination, real things happen. We know this, for instance, in my field, that when a person imagines their life to be terrible and horrible, you can see their whole body slump and everything goes down, and all all their physical processes are beginning to go in a difficult way, or what we've now found in research, that if you get into a heroic posture and a strong posture and you stay in that for 2 minutes, your hormones shift. There's a hormonal shift that takes place if you get into different physical positions. So we know that imagination and body are very closely related. And that's why I studied and developed this process called embodied imagination, where you're in the body of imagination, where the imagination affects the body.
And is that in dream state, or is that in waking state, or both?
This is in a state that is in between waking and sleeping. It's the state that is called the hypnagogic state. And so I work in the hypnagogic state and help people to flash back into dreams. So we use the same method that is naturally happening, for instance, with people that have a trauma and can get into a flashback. We use that same kind of memory where a soldier, when she's been on the battlefield, she can suddenly hear a loud sound and the whole battlefield is back. That is a flashback. And we're using that same kind of memory to flash back into dreams. We've developed techniques for that, to flash back into dreams. And then the interesting thing is that you can work a dream not just from the perspective of the one who's telling the story, which I call habitual consciousness, habits of consciousness, or ego. But the habitual consciousness is telling the story. But when you go into the dream, then you can, through techniques that we've developed from acting, like from Stanislavski method acting, you can get into, for instance, a cow that is over there in the dream, and you can begin to experience the whole dream from the perspective of that cow, or from the perspective of the tree, or from the perspective of the grass. You can go into all kinds of different perspectives, and then all these perspectives begin to work on your body, and then something begins to change in your body. That's how I use embodied imagination.
Give us some examples on how somebody would do that.
Well, for instance, you are walking in the street and suddenly a dog comes up from behind, and you're not afraid of dogs, you're just walking. And but the dog seems to be angry, and then you realize it's a rabid dog, and then you begin to run, and you're really, really afraid, and you begin to run, and you run, and so this is coming up. And so that is the embodiment of the running away. So that is the perspective that you're identified with, and now you help the person to get out of that identification and begin to become aware of the dog. And then as you become aware of the dog, you begin to see the dog, and then you begin to feel the dog, and you feel the of the dog, and the biting of the dog, and the bloodthirst of the dog. And so then you have both this, and so you feel those at the same time, and then a shift begins to take place. Then the body automatically goes through a shift, or you begin to cough.
Yeah, hello. You made me sneeze, man. I was smelling the dog. I'm allergic to dogs and everything. Nice. No, I'm not allergic to dogs, but that was really cool. And I want to talk more about the dream state, because it's certainly fascinating. And when I realize I'm in a dream, sometimes I'll just kind of push the envelope to see what I can do. And I can never quite do things the exact way I want to do them. There's always off a little bit. What's your take on that? Are you able to, when you're in a dream, can you have exact precision, or is it more abstract? When
you're in, my specialty is in common dreams, normal dreams, not lucid dreams. Lucid dreaming is a field all unto itself. I know about it, and I've had lucid dreams, but it's definitely not my specialty. I'm interested in the dreams where people are convinced that they're awake. In an ordinary dream, which is a dream in which you're convinced you're awake, in an ordinary dream, you can smell, you can touch, all your senses are activated. So And that you can know in a lucid dream, you can touch something and you can feel it with your hand. Or you can stamp on the ground and you can feel it in your feet, and you can smell things that are going on, and you can taste things. All these kind of things can happen in a lucid dream. For instance, the great researcher of lucid dreams, his name is Stephen LaBerge, he had a patient who had an eating disorder, and he helped her get into lucid dreaming. And as she was in the lucid dream, she would go to restaurants and would eat everything on the menu. And then in the morning, she would not be hungry. And so he treated her eating disorder with lucid dreaming. So you can taste in dreams. You can, all your senses work in dreams, and then you wake up and you go through amnesia, and we pass through the Greeks called it the river of forgetfulness, Lethe. And so you move through amnesia, and you remain, some shards remain. And some people have very good short-term memory. They can remember much more than people who don't have a very good short-term memory. And then you can take things back, and we can go back the same way. We can go through the amnesia back to dreaming. But you have to remember a little bit, because if you don't remember anything, you can't go back. But if you even remember what the sky looked like, or what the weather was like, if you remember anything of the event, you can get back to it.
That's great. Time travel, then you could essentially go back and do work on your astral body in the dream state.
Well, I find time travel very interesting, but for me, it has a very particular meaning. Time travel for me means that you can go to your past and work on your past and change your past, and thereby changing the present. So time travel is that you can actually go in a time capsule back to the past and change it without changing the facts. Because if you change the facts, you get into some kind of a fantasy world that is not real. But you can, for instance, when you have had a terrible experience in your past, not just experience it from the perspective of, like, I'll give you an example. Woman who has experienced a rape in her past. In the work that we're doing, I mean, as a psychotherapist, I was working with her, and she was beginning to experience the rape again. Once she would get into that, she would be re-traumatized. And so we couldn't approach it until she told me that there was a big chest in the room. And so what I helped her do is to move her identification, not with the person on the bed, but with the chest. And she began to experience the chest and how solid the chest was in the wood. And she became identified with the chest. And as she became identified with the chest, then she could begin to experience that, but it became less threatening. And that's how we then slowly started to digest it, by moving the perspective away from her as the experiencing victim to the chest that was just there.
Yeah. Now, you also talk about, when you get into some of this creative imagination work, it reminds me a bit of like magic, kind of.
Yes. Well, there's a difference between my work and magic. And the difference is, and this is a discussion that has gone on for about 2,000 years, that what we are trying to do with embodied imagination, what we're trying to do is to set up a communication with these forces that are outside of our awareness. And like in the dream, for instance, that chest that I was talking about, that is present in her memory, but once she gets identified with the chest, it becomes an entity, a presence, a being. And I want to set up relationships to the world in between. Now, the world in between was a very important world. It was called the daimonic realm. The daimonic realm, I spoke about it a moment ago. That's where the planets are. It's the world between eternity of the stars and the temporal of our bodies that will decay and die. And so there's a world in between where there are embodied presences like for instance, the fairy or the planets or the ancestors. All these different beings live in that world. And I am trying to establish a relationship with these daimones, with these in-between beings, with these presences that influence our lives profoundly, and I want to get a communication with them. Somebody who's doing magic is trying to get a communication with them in order to make them do the bidding of the person who is the magician. So I do not want the world of daimones to work for me. I do not want them to become I do not want to become their employer. I want to communicate with them, because as I communicate with them, I know that life becomes much more rich, and that enrichment of life and life becomes much more subtle. That's again, we're back in alchemy, because in alchemy, it's the movement to the increasingly subtle. So I'm interested in communication, and magic is interested in control.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. Absolutely. And have you had any dreams recently that might connect to world events? Do you have dreams like that? Do you ever wake up and have a dream that something similar to that happens?
Well, for the last year and a half, I did every Friday or every Thursday night, I did something called, no, every Friday night it was, the Spooky Dreams Cafe, which was dreams during COVID. And people would present their COVID dreams, and lots of people had dreams that were referring to the pandemic, but in very indirect ways. People could be dreaming about a sick dog, or people could be dreaming about being attacked, or people could be dreaming about suffocating behind something or with their masks. It can be many different things. And there were many dreams that were very resilient and that brought resilience to people. So I think that dreams react very much to the day-to-day world. And then there are dreams that are that the next day suddenly the same thing happens that happened in a dream, and those are precognitive dreams. They are, I think, relatively rare, but there are sometimes elements of dreams that happen the next day, and we don't know how it could happen, but you're dreaming about somebody, and this happens relatively frequently. You're dreaming about somebody, and then you get a phone call from them the next day, and you haven't spoken to them in a year. Those kind of things happen, and I've seen that a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting how also the television is, I've noticed with me, if I watch, I don't like to watch scary movies, but every once in a while, Kristen's watching a scary movie, I'll pick up a few minutes of it. And when I go to sleep, I notice sometimes my dreams are very similar to that movie that I was watching. And then I question, if you've got 1 million people or 100 million people watching a certain film, it's going to have a certain effect on them in the waking state, which is going to have a particular effect in their sleeping state. And it's going to kind of be a cyclical thing there. Very, very powerful way to control the masses with entertainment and dreams.
Yeah, but I do think that everybody responds to it in different ways, right? But what
Yeah.
we see,
Yeah.
but what is happening is, I've always been very interested in the involuntary imagination or the embodied imagination in politics, and have organized conferences about apocalypse, and the imagination has a profound influence on politics, and so. These days, we're very much in the imagination of polarization. Everything is polarized, and that's an image. So we're caught in that image of polarization, and everything that we're producing is about that polarization. And the polarization between men and women, the polarization between the left and the right, the polarization between black and white, all these polarizations that are going on. And everything is seen in that style of polarization. And we see it in Washington all the time. And for instance, Bob Dole just died, and he was a person who brought people together. You don't have these people anymore because we are now in this image of polarization. So it is not just that the entertainment is creating particular images, but the images are already there and are being picked up by the entertainment industry.
Yeah, and do you remember, I think it was in the early 2000s when thousands of people were dreaming of the same guy.
Yeah, what was that? I don't remember that.
That really weird. There's he's called you can even go to This Man, is what he's called, This Man, the dream state, and he has these like real thick eyebrows, and there's speculation who he is and what he is. But I find it fascinating that so many people around the world were seeing the same person in their dreams.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, I'll send you to the links, and maybe I could get your feedback on it in the future.
Yeah.
And do you think there could be some type of technology that could allow, maybe they wanted to do some experiments on people and tap into their dreams just to see if they could do it? Out of science, of course.
Well, I think it has been done with rats. If a rat runs through a particular maze all the time, you can see what's happening in their brain, and in their brain you can see the maze. Say that the maze is a triangle. The maze, the triangle is visible in the brain, and as the rat then goes to sleep, you can still see the triangle happening. So clearly they're dreaming about what was happening during the daytime. So we are beginning to be able to read through fMRIs, to read something of a beginning of how people are dreaming, but it's not yet very precise. So we know that we can pick up things that are happening during the day, and in the night, the same kind of things happen in the brain waves. So it's very much in the beginning stages.
Do you see a time when they're going to be able to record somebody's dream and pick up what they're seeing?
Never say never, but I think that would be very far off. I'm working currently on artificial intelligence that is empathic, so that we can create virtual companions, and that is the beginning of an AI that can actually where we can communicate, and where there is another person there that you can like and can deeply communicate with. So I'm very interested in artificial intelligence and how that works, and creating virtual humans. But reading dreams, I think, is, if it will happen, to do it with any precision, my guess would be that this is many, many decades away.
Now, if you've got an artificial intelligence that's an empath, or it's picking up your energy and feelings, will it be sentient? Is it sentient?
Well, the word sentient actually means pertaining to the senses. The word sentient means that you respond to sense impressions. In that way, it is sentient because it responds to sense impressions and it reacts to your sense impressions. It interprets your sense impressions. It sees your face and responds to your facial expressions. It hears your voice. It responds to your voice expressions. So it displays empathy. It displays sentience. Is it sentient? It is not alive in that way. It is responding and it behaves as if it were. And then in our relationship, it becomes alive because it becomes part of our relationship and part of the back and forth between us. And as that relationship happens, the relationship becomes alive. And that's what we're interested in, to have a live relationship between artificial intelligence and humans.
Jeez. Reminds me a bit of the xenobots that they just did another paper on. Where they were taking these frog cells off of actually the backs of these specific frogs using artificial intelligence, and these cells were morphing into like Pac-Man and then creating, that they were basically sculpting other cells. And that made me think, okay, there's consciousness in everything.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think that within a very short period of time, we will not be able to distinguish the kind of awareness that AI has from other forms of awareness. It will be a different kind of awareness than human awareness, but it will be a form of knowing and a form of being that is very difficult to distinguish from other life forms.
And then the question is, will it eventually take over and will we be in the matrix, and will pod people be the literal pod people? Hey, there's Bob. He decided to go in a pod. He's having fun though. He's in a virtual reality world. There could be a lot of positives. I mean, if somebody's having a tough physical time and they get into a virtual reality world and they're dealing with incredible, amazing, doing what they want to do and enjoy and feeling different. I don't think that that's bad. It's going to have consequences, but I don't necessarily think.
Yeah, but I think one of the tricky things is that we assume that artificial intelligence will develop in the same way that human intelligence develops, and that it will just be bigger human intelligence. But I don't think that that's the way it's going to go. I think it's going to be that it's a particular form of intelligence that is as different from our intelligence as spider intelligence is, or as the intelligence of a bear is, or it will become an entirely different intelligence. But what is happening? They asked, I think, 100 of the leading scientists, what are you most afraid of in science? And they were not talking about global warming. They were saying artificial intelligence. So there's a fear going on about artificial intelligence. And that fear is something that we'll have to deal with, because artificial intelligence are going to become our companions. They're going to become beings that populate our world in augmented reality. Our grandchildren will live with artificial intelligence in a very intimate way.
It's great perspective. I like the optimism, and it makes sense also. It really does make sense about it not just being a bigger human or a bigger ego. Let's hope that's not what happens. There's enough ego on the planet today, but hey,
yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Now, one of the things I really want to talk to you about, and I find this fascinating, is the apocalyptic imagination in politics. Boy, isn't that the truth. Mm-hmm. And I study ancient Sumerian and Babylonian tablets, and there's this old cuneiform tablet called Enki and Nineveh. And making people in a laboratory. They're getting drunk and making people in this 3,500-year-old tablet. And they make this one dude, and they're like, this dude's an idiot. They don't say this dude, but they go, this one's an idiot. Let's give him to the king. And I was like, that's right. That's where politics came from. Drum roll, please. Yeah. So what is your take?
I think that But I started these Facing Apocalypse conferences in the 80s, and then the apocalyptic imagination was very much focused on the nuclear issue, and everybody was convinced about that nuclear winter was coming. Now we're in global warming, but then we were in nuclear winter, and the apocalyptic imagination comes up by people being very frightened of doom, and because the word apocalypse means revelation. So it is the revelation of a new world to come. But in order for the new world to come, the old world has to disintegrate. And so it is the fear of the disintegration of